Trump, the U.S., and Bitcoin. Can Trump move the U.S. into Bitcoin in the future, right? It's something I want to examine a little bit about today and give some thoughts to what that would look like and whether it's even practical for the U.S. to move to Bitcoin and what it might mean for our investments, our investment values, and where we're headed. Folks, I'm Shawn McBride. This is the Future Done Right channel, which is about the future of business. We talk about what's happening and try to help business owners and business leaders position themselves for the future by understanding what's going on and what it means to us, and really take a deeper dive among some headlines and think about what that means for us, our personal situations, and our businesses and growth. Obviously not investment advice here on the channel. We're just here to talk about what we see, and then you can go talk to your investment advisors, make your decisions. So there's been a lot of talk about Bitcoin and the use of Bitcoin. Trump seems to now be a strong supporter of Bitcoin. He gave a lot of speeches out there. He has people in his inner circle now that seem to be strong proponents of Bitcoin. There's talk of having a U.S. Bitcoin reserve, which, interestingly enough, I think we somewhat already have, right? The U.S. government has actually, from reports, accumulated a fair amount of Bitcoin already. They get this through seizures and other things where, criminal activity or other civil penalties, whatever, they confiscate it. So actually the U.S. government, from our understanding, is holding a fair amount of Bitcoin already. The idea would be to go out in the market and be a buyer to add more Bitcoin. And then the question beyond that is, could the U.S. get moved over to use Bitcoin as our currency? There would be a lot of practical issues with converting the U.S. economy to Bitcoin, right? There would have to be enough Bitcoin to support the U.S. economy, and our debt would have to be revalued into Bitcoin, right? Because if the U.S. was going to stop using U.S. dollars as its central currency, the debt would have to be revalued in terms of that. The bigger problem I see, and it's more of a political issue than anything else, is a full transition to a Bitcoin-based economy in the U.S. would mean that we would have to reckon with our debt, and we would also have to run balanced budgets in the future, right? We would either have to have enough Bitcoin to underlie all the transactions of the U.S. government, right? All the outgoing expenditures, there would have to be enough there, or we would actually have to borrow it, not on a basis like we borrow today, right? When the U.S. government borrows U.S. dollars today, they just say, we'll give you more U.S. dollars in the future. But if they would borrow Bitcoin, you would actually have to come up with those Bitcoins. You couldn't just create more Bitcoins like you can create U.S. dollars, right? You can pay off the current U.S. deficit essentially by creating more currency and just pumping it out into the system, right? You don't have that kind of default risk when it's your currency. But Bitcoin isn't the U.S. government's currency. At least we don't control it to what we know, right? I mean, there are people out here, conspiracy theories talk about how, perhaps, the world government's created Bitcoin as a way to move people into a digital currency. Putting aside that, whole line of discussion, which I don't want to get into on this video, the reality is, you would have to have enough to balance your budget, or you would have to do real borrowing that would have to get repaid with real dollars. It would cause a day of reckoning to actually come. Whereas the current system, a lot of people call inflation a hidden tax, right? So you can have that hidden tax. A lot of people don't realize that they're being taxed by inflation, right? These policies go through, the money gets bought, the stuff happens, 30-some% of the U.S. economy, GDP, is government. These government workers get paid, they buy houses. There's a lot of stuff happening in the economy by printed money. And it works, and it just has been working, right? Now, whether there'll be a day of reckoning for that, a lot of people talk about that. Something I'm willing to examine with you guys more deeply. If you want to comment, let me know you want to talk about that more. We'll talk about what a day of reckoning might look like in a future video. But there doesn't necessarily have to be a day of reckoning with a fiat currency, because we can see there's been a lot of can kicking, and there's a whole line of economists, very smart people, I've watched their work, They, believe in the modern monetary theory. Essentially, you can just keep printing money indefinitely. Uh, to me, fundamentally, it feels like that has some issues to it. But these people have been around for a long time, and it's worked for some period of time, right? People have printed money just endlessly, and it keeps working somehow. And so that is a very nice feature. Whereas if you were going to switch the US to Bitcoin, you would actually have to reckon at the end of the day, you would have to tally your accounts and make things make sense. Further, not only would you have to tally the accounts, but you would have to figure out how to denominate everything in Bitcoin, right? So if this became the standard currency in the US, you would, essentially have to pay your bills in there, right? You would be remitting Bitcoin. You would be filling out your tax return in terms of Bitcoin. Um, and you would be paying your property taxes and other things in terms of Bitcoin. That is a massive transition to get from here to there. A lot of people think about a world where you can pay either way, and I know some local governments in different parts of the U.S. have experimented with that, right? You can pay us in cash, or you can pay us in Bitcoin, right? And that seems like a great idea. The problem is, that Bitcoin to cash U.S. dollar exchange rate will need to be adjusted. Obviously, the Bitcoin value has changed tremendously in terms of U.S. dollar, and there's a raging debate. Is Bitcoin volatile, or is the U.S. dollar volatile, right? We don't know, right? Because the two are fixed in terms of each other. Certainly, a lot of people feel like the U.S. dollar is more fixed because, your property tax bill stays about the same every year. Your car insurance bill goes up incrementally. Everything goes up incrementally. So they feel like the U.S. dollar is the normal, uh, and Bitcoin is the one that's the outlier. But that's just kind of a recency bias, right? It's just because you're used to seeing the U.S. dollar so much. I think people are having a hard time putting a value on Bitcoin because, in my opinion, we're in a binary world, right? And I really don't have a deep dog in this fight, right? I mean, I have a little bit of Bitcoin as a hedge, right? I mean, I think about the possibility of us having a massive run up if there is ever a switch over to Bitcoin. So, I think it's advisable to have some Bitcoin from my perspective, or some exposure to Bitcoin in different ways. So I think that makes sense. Personally, not investment advice, but having a little bit of exposure to Bitcoin is probably not a bad thing, to hedge against the possibility of a massive run up. But I think Bitcoin's going to be binary. My view has been, and I still see this as I read the articles and I do the analysis, it's going to be a yes or no, right? Either something massive is going to happen on a global scale, and a lot of people are going to switch over to Bitcoin. It's actually going to be used as a base currency and actually become normal. There's going to be really transactions that are either done in Bitcoin or done in, placeholders of Bitcoin that are settled in Bitcoin, or this stuff's going to get regulated out of existence, right? And I think it's a one or the other. And if it gets used, it's going to go way up. So you want to have some, at least in my opinion, not investment advice. It's nice to have some, so that you have the ability to have some already if it goes way up in value. So you're not left on the sidelines. Of course, real assets, real estate, stocks, other things should still also go up in value as well because they have real value. They would just be sold in a different currency. Maybe you bought your stock in cash, US dollars, and you're going to then sell it for Bitcoin, right? It is possible in a changeover situation if the world morphs that much. But practically, to our original question, I don't think it's going to be very easy for the U.S. to move to Bitcoin. Yes, Bitcoin may be used more. U.S. may build a reserve of Bitcoin. If the U.S. government starts buying a lot of Bitcoin, it's going to be very good for Bitcoin investors, at least in the short term, perhaps the intermediate term, because it's going to put that upward pressure on it, right? There's going to be buy, and potentially in large blocks, which the U.S. government can do in ways that nobody else can do, right? The U.S. government can finance and buy things that nobody else can buy. And they could buy an amount of Bitcoin that would massively move the market. And so that could happen. And that would be very good for people that are in it. But in the long term, there's going to be a question, right? Do we actually use this as a currency? Does it really become a base of financial transactions? Or is it always this other thing sitting on the sidelines waiting? And that's where I view it right now. It's on the sidelines waiting. Maybe one day it'll take off, but it's still waiting, and we're over a decade into this experiment, and we're still waiting, and there's no sign of the waiting ending unless some calamity happens. Meanwhile, we had one administration here in the U.S. which was very anti-Bitcoin. Now we appear to have a administration coming in pro-Bitcoin. But that can flip real fast. We're going to watch U.S. policy flip real fast, right? Biden did a record number of executive orders. Trump's about to take office. I'm hearing about a blizzard of executive orders going the other direction. But what this tells us is every time we get a change of the guard here in the U.S., everything changes, right? And we're all caught up as part of that. And I just did a video recently here on the channel about preparing for the future. And we were talking about how that change creates a lot of uncertainty. So I recommend that video to you to go check that out as well. But I don't see the U.S. jumping directly into Bitcoin. I do see potentially the U.S. having significant influence on the Bitcoin market here in the short and intermediate term. It could be very interesting to watch. May make a lot of money for some people that are invested in it. So non-investment advice, but certainly something for you to research and talk about with your financial advisor what you think you want to do with that. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a yes or no. Bitcoin could be worth a fortune or it could be worth nothing. And I don't think the U.S. is going to adopt it. I'd like to hear what you think. Do you agree or disagree with my analysis? Let me know in the comments. Always enjoy that. If you have ideas for future videos, please let me know. If you're getting value, please consider subscribing. We'll be bringing more videos about the future of business to you. And feel free to share with your friends. And go check out other videos in our library. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. I'll see you for another video again soon.